Since it's Lent, I'll begin with a confession. One of the things I most dislike about preaching is the pressure to be a religious talking head. Many of my listeners I know have an expectation that I will say something about every scandalous or horrifying development in the 24-hour news cycle. And that kind of expectation can feel exhausting. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think the church should take a stand when an important moral issue is at stake. I do think the church should remember those who have died when an important tragedy takes place. I do think the church should guide its people practically on how to live. But I have been trained to approach a sermon or a homily or a reflection as first and foremost an interpretation of Scripture. Scripture does have something to say about actual human lives and events that are happening in the larger world. And yet, I get a little peeved at the assumption, an assumption that is often unstated but sometimes stated outright, that what's happening in the larger world is the most important thing for a preacher to talk about. And that Scripture, what we supposedly consider to be God's very word to us, should only be slotted in later, once the most important thing is given the attention that it's due. I say all of this, and then I come to a passage like the one that's been assigned for this evening's gathering. A political leader, cunning as a fox, intent on causing destruction. A city full of violence in which people just can't get along. A widespread conspiracy to silence those who seek to speak the truth. It sounds, if you ask me, just like the stories that come through on our cable news channels and in our social media feeds. There's nothing more contemporary than politicians going on a power-hungry rampage, than a city rent apart by conflict, than an activist who risks his well-being to do good in a hostile world. Jesus might as well have been in 21st century Kyiv, Ukraine, or Tukulaka, El Salvador, or Jerusalem, Jerusalem, or New York, New York. Scripture speaks into the world in which we are living, sometimes uncannily so. And when it does so, it's not possible for the preacher to stay apart from the world. Sometimes the preacher has to dive right in. It is now March 20th, the first day of spring, and it's been 2 months or 59 days since the inauguration of our 47th president. To those of you who are reeling from the events of the past 2 months, to those of you who have done your best to ignore all the chaos, and even to those of you who are celebrating a new era in government, Jesus tonight has a message for you. First, it's important to call a fox a fox. When political or other leaders are behaving like predators, Jesus is telling us we must designate them as such. Of course, as Christians, it often makes sense to pray for and even respect our civil leaders. But it's also necessary at times to talk about the ways in which they are being problematic and harmful. Jesus is under no illusion that might equals right. Herod is a king, but Herod is also wrong, and Jesus is not afraid to say so. Second, when in doubt, walk towards Jerusalem. Jesus is aware that there is a target on his back. He knows that Herod wants to kill him. He knows that Herod's palace is in Jerusalem, and he knows that prophets are killed in Jerusalem. The Pharisees seem to tell Jesus that he should walk in the other direction, that he should do everything he can to escape Herod's grasp. But Jesus doesn't listen. He proceeds directly towards what he realizes is his certain end. He does not march away from conflict, but to it instead. He embraces death. He does not try to evade it. Third, if Herod is a fox, then be a hen. It is true that Jesus uses the metaphor of a mother hen as a way of talking about his caring and reconciling nature, as a way of describing his eagerness to gather all people together in unity and in peace. But Jesus is also aware that a mother hen is vulnerable. If the fox is the predator, then the hen is quite obviously the prey. In the face of certain violence, Jesus does not move to stock up on ammunition and fortify his walls. Jesus knows that people will kill and stone him, and yet he nevertheless longs for vulnerability. Jesus desires, he tells us, to be like a hen. For Jesus, vulnerability is not an unfortunate reality to be lamented, but a positive choice to be embraced. A few hundred years before Jesus of Nazareth was born, a group of fables began to circulate around ancient Greece. They would eventually be collected together and attributed to an enslaved person, possibly fictional, possibly real, named Aesop. We know them now as Aesop's fables. We don't know if Jesus was aware of it, but one of Aesop's fables was the fox and the hen. In the fable, the fox tries to mislead the hen so that it can become an easy meal for the fox. But the hen understands what the fox is doing and refuses to let the fox get the upper hand. Just as in the fable of the tortoise and the hare, expectations are upended. The weakest and most vulnerable one turns out to have more than we thought of power and strength. In Aesop's fables, in the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, and God willing in our lives too, the hen ultimately prevails. The fox does its best to outwit and outmuscle the hen, but the hen has secret tricks up her sleeve that the fox can't really see coming. Even when, especially when, death and destruction loom on the horizon, the hen finds a way to power through. It may not always seem like it from my sermons, but I do in fact watch the news. I know things are bad out there right now for so many people. It seems so often like we live in a world in which the foxes always win. But trust me, trust Aesop, trust Jesus. It's better to be a hen.